At my father's retirement gala, he raised a glass and declared my brother the future of our empire. The crowd clapped. Then he looked at me, smirked and said, "And Naomi, maybe you'll find something you're good at someday." Laughter followed. But what none of them knew was that I had already built something bigger than they could imagine. And when a Pentagon official walked into that room and asked for Director Callahan, the silence hit like a bomb. They didn't just ignore me, they erased me. But tonight, they'd remember every single thing they chose to forget. I was 9 when I realized my place in the Callahan family wasn't beside them, it was behind them, always behind. I remember standing at the edge of our backyard during one of those summer cookouts my father used to throw for his company's top clients. I wore the dress Mum told me to wear, smiled the way she said I should, and waited for someone, anyone, to notice I was there. But they never did. Not even when Lucas spilled soda on the grill and nearly set the tablecloth on fire. Everyone laughed and called him charming. When I quietly handed over paper towels, someone told me, "Sweetie, stay out of the way." Lucas was always the sun in our house, loud, golden, demanding the room without trying. Even when he failed his calculus midterms twice, my parents said, "He's more of a leader than a numbers guy." But when I brought home perfect scores, my father nodded once and said, "Don't get cocky, Naomi. It's unbecoming in girls." That was my first lesson. Excellence doesn't matter when you're invisible. By 12, I'd learned not to expect a ride to my science fairs. I'd go alone, trophies tucked into my backpack on the way home. Once, I placed top 5 in a regional robotics challenge. I printed the newspaper clipping and taped it on the fridge. It disappeared the next day, replaced by Lucas's lacrosse photo. No one said anything, and neither did I. You learn silence early when you're the child no one roots for. In high school, Lucas wrecked my father's prized vintage car during a joyride. My mother cried, my father shouted, but by dinner, it was all jokes and roast chicken. That same week, I missed one dinner to attend a scholarship interview. My father called me ungrateful for not respecting family time. He said I was selfish, too serious, cold. He didn't understand that I had to be serious, that being light-hearted was a privilege no one ever gave me. The final straw came during senior year. I had just been accepted into MIT on a full-ride scholarship. I waited 3 nights for the right moment to tell them. When I finally did, over dinner, carefully rehearsed, my mother blinked once and said, "Is that the one in Boston?" Then turned to Lucas and asked if he had packed for his fraternity trip. I still remember the burn in my throat, that metallic taste of disappointment when hope dies quietly. Even now, years later, that moment lingers like smoke. Lucas got internships handed to him by my father's golf buddies. He was groomed for the company since he could hold a pen. By the time I graduated with honours, he was already sitting in boardrooms, half-prepared, overconfident, and praised for it. Meanwhile, I applied to positions under a pseudonym because my last name made recruiters assume I was just the boss's other kid. I wasn't bitter. Not yet. Just tired. Tired of trying to earn what others inherited by birthright. At 30, when I came back for Thanksgiving after 5 years away, the table was set for 9. I was the 10th. I ended up sitting at the breakfast bar. No one noticed. Not until dessert, when Lucas raised a toast to family, and my father clinked his glass without even glancing in my direction. I washed my own plate that night and left without saying goodbye. People think betrayal comes in loud moments, fights, slamming doors, tears. But the worst betrayal is quiet. It's 1,000 tiny omissions that say, "You don't matter enough to hurt." And that was my family's specialty, making me feel like a placeholder in my own bloodline. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I stopped trying to belong. I started building something that didn't need their permission. But deep down, even as I walked away from their world, a part of me still hoped. One day, they'd see me. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Not until everything they built started crumbling because of the daughter they never saw coming. By the time I turned 35, I had mastered the art of being unremarkable. In their eyes, at least, it was easier that way. If I showed up too polished, too proud, it made them uncomfortable. If I showed up at all, it was already too much. So I stopped showing up. My father's birthday came and went each year without a text from me. I no longer sent gifts. He never noticed. Or if he did, he never asked why. My mother would call sometimes, pretending it was about something casual, an old family recipe, a question about insurance. But it always came back to Lucas. "He's doing so well, Naomi," she'd say, as if I hadn't already seen the news, the headlines, the features. "He just signed a new defense contract. Dad is so proud." Proud. That word used to stab. Now it just passed through me, like wind through an open window. They didn't know that while Lucas was signing contracts, I was quietly rewriting the way military logistics worked. I had co-founded a startup, under an alias of course, with a few other engineers I trusted. Our work wasn't flashy, it wasn't in the papers, but it was effective, efficient, smart. We were solving problems that the industry didn't even know existed yet. And we were getting attention from places far bigger than my father's company. Ironically, my biggest win came through a contract Lucas had botched. He'd overpromised on a project for a federal agency and underdelivered by months. Someone in procurement remembered my name from a tech panel I'd been on years earlier, back when I was still naive enough to think my family might be impressed. They weren't. But the Pentagon was. That phone call changed everything. Within months, I was leading a classified pilot program. Our tech cut fulfillment costs by 27% and reduced failure rates in critical supply chains by almost half. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was setting standards. I was making rules. And yet, I still hadn't told my family. I didn't see the point. Not because I was hiding, but because I finally understood that telling them wouldn't make a difference. They'd just smile politely, maybe nod, and go back to talking about Lucas's latest podcast interview or keynote speech. So I let them live in their little story, the one where I was the background character, until the gala. It was my father's official retirement party. I wasn't invited, not really. The invitation came through a mass email from the company's PR team. No personal note, no hope you'll be there, just a time, a date, and a dress code. I almost didn't go. But something in me, curiosity, closure, maybe something pettier, decided otherwise. I arrived in a simple black dress, hair up, no entourage, just me. No one noticed when I walked in. They noticed later. Lucas stood beside my father on stage, grinning like he'd already won something. My mother beamed from the front row. The guests, board members, shareholders, family friends, clapped and toasted as my father raised a gold-plated key. "This," he announced, "is more than symbolic. Today, I hand over not just the company but the legacy." He turned to Lucas. "Son, you've made me proud." Then he looked at me. "And Naomi, maybe one day you'll find something you're good at." The laughter wasn't cruel. It was casual, easy, familiar. They didn't even know they were laughing at a storm. Because what they didn't realize, what none of them knew, was that I already owned nearly half the company. Quietly, strategically, legally. And that the key my father was handing Lucas, it unlocked nothing. Not anymore. Hope, I've learned, is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. It starts as a flicker, a possibility. But in the hands of people who never saw you, it becomes a blade, sharp, dismissive, and silent. Years before that gala, before the silence turned into strategy, I had one last attempt at being seen. It was the summer after grad school, when I still believed that if I worked hard enough, they'd notice. I spent months building a logistics model designed to streamline military tech deployment across unstable zones, less cost, faster response, and minimal risk to human lives. I stayed up night after night in a shared basement workspace with 2 other engineers, coding through cold pizza and warm coffee. When I was finally confident enough, I sent the pitch to Callahan Systems, my father's company, not through HR, not through an external email, through him, directly. It was a risk, but I thought, this is what families are for. This is why legacy matters. He replied 4 days later, not with feedback, not with encouragement, with a line, "Lucas is handling innovation. Forward your ideas to him." No greeting, no signature, just a redirect. Still, I did what he said. I sent the files to Lucas. I even attached a note. "Let me know what you think. Happy to walk you through the back end if needed." 2 weeks passed. Silence. Then a press release came out on the company site. Callahan Systems unveils new AI logistics model for government contracts. It was my model, word for word, line by line. Only now it was labelled under Lucas's visionary leadership. I sat at my desk, fists clenched, watching a video of my brother explaining concepts he barely understood, mispronouncing terms I had crafted with care. When I confronted him calmly, privately, he smiled. "You didn't patent it, Naomi. You shared it. That's what family does, right?" That was the moment hope died. Not loudly, not with tears or shouting. It died the way a flame dies in the wind, quietly, completely, and without apology. I told my father, showed him comparisons, line items, proof. He looked at me with that same flat expression I'd seen since childhood. "You should have been clearer about wanting credit," he said. Credit, as if this were schoolyard group work, not intellectual theft. As if my years of sacrifice, my insomnia, my brilliance, were something to be casually redistributed for the sake of family harmony. It broke something in me. Not just the belief that I could ever belong, but the belief that I should keep trying. That summer, I packed up everything and left for DC. I erased my name from every document tied to them, blocked company contacts, and built a new identity under a corporate shell, LNC Systems. A simple name, nothing flashy. It stood for nothing in particular, just initials I could mould into something new. I used the pain they gave me as fuel, the humiliation as structure. Every time I doubted myself, I thought of Lucas standing on a stage presenting my code as his. That kept me going. And somewhere between the sleepless weeks and solitary wins, I stopped wanting their validation. I wanted something bigger, autonomy, recognition, revenge, maybe, but not the dramatic movie-style kind, the quiet kind, the kind that builds until one day the world knows who you are before they ever realize they ignored you. And the irony? Lucas's stolen pitch failed. Within 8 months, the agency quietly pulled the project due to unreliable outputs and undertrained modelling. Their words, not mine. It wasn't built wrong, it was just presented by the wrong person. But by then, I wasn't watching. I was already 3 prototypes ahead in a lab funded by private investors and one unexpected source who believed in second chances. They called me Ms. Callahan the first time we met. I corrected them. "Just Naomi," I said, because for the first time in my life, that name, mine and mine alone, was enough. Success didn't come with confetti. It came in invoices paid on time, in projects completed under budget, in silence broken only by the hum of processors and late-night keyboard taps. LNC Systems grew slowly at first. Government work moved like molasses, but it grew with integrity. We didn't pitch hype. We proved results. My co-founder Elijah Nguyen, a quiet genius from Detroit, often said, "Let the product speak before we do." So we did, and it worked. But no matter how far I rose, a part of me carried the wound of being overlooked. It didn't scream anymore. It pulsed, low and constant, like phantom pain from an old break that never quite healed. Still, I didn't look back. Not until a mistake Lucas made pulled me back in. It started with a phone call. A Pentagon liaison, terse and formal, asked if I could consult on a supply chain breach. "Unusual failure patterns," she said. "System breakdowns in high-risk zones, possibly internal." I recognized the project code immediately. It was the same system Lucas had repackaged from my original framework, the one he stole, tweaked, and sold through Callahan Systems. The breach was bigger than a few missed shipments. It was compromising national security, millions in defense assets lost, lives at risk. I didn't say yes to help them. I said yes because I couldn't let my design, my name, become a liability. The audit was brutal. What Lucas had done was criminally negligent. He'd stripped key redundancies, overpromised scalability, and buried error reporting layers. His team had cut corners to meet deadlines and boost margins. They'd signed off on every shortcut like it was strategy. I submitted my report thinking that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. A week later, a man in a navy suit showed up outside my office with a simple envelope. Inside, a letter from Callahan Systems board requesting a private consultation regarding internal restructuring and potential acquisition interests. I laughed. The same company that refused to acknowledge my existence now wanted my help. Still, I was curious. I said yes on one condition: full transparency. They'd give me access to internal reports, legal documents, and confidential forecasts. They agreed. Too quickly. That's when I knew something was wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, what I found wasn't just mismanagement, it was decay. Callahan Systems was rotting from the inside. Overpaid execs, underfunded R&D, ghost contracts, hush payments. Lucas hadn't just coasted. He'd hollowed out the company and decorated the shell. And my father? He'd looked the other way, or maybe he couldn't bear to admit that his golden son had turned the empire into sand. That discovery should have satisfied me, should have felt like justice. But it didn't. It felt empty. Because even as I uncovered each lie, each forged document and padded invoice, I found myself wondering how many of these people knew what Lucas did to me, how many saw my work rebranded under his name and stayed silent, how many thought, she's just the daughter, she'll get over it. They were wrong. I didn't get over it. I built around it, brick by brick, with every humiliation as mortar. And now, with the company on the verge of collapse, they came crawling, not with apologies but with business terms. I was done playing by theirs. I called Elijah. "We're buying them," I said. There was a pause. Then, calmly, "You sure?" I was, but not for revenge. For control, because if they wouldn't give me a seat at the table, I'd buy the whole damn table and throw them out. Within days, we began negotiations, quietly, legally, and with the precision of people who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. I didn't tell my family. Let them laugh at the gala. Let them toast Lucas like he was a king. I'd let the ink dry on the deal first. Then I'd watch their crowns fall. The first step in dismantling an empire is silence. Not chaos, not confrontation, just silence. Controlled, focused, absolute. That's how I moved. No headlines, no whispers, just paperwork and power of attorney transfers, hidden inside nondescript legal agreements. We began acquiring shares through shell firms with clean histories and federal backing, entities no one could trace to me. Not even my father's best legal team would suspect that a daughter he considered irrelevant was quietly consolidating ownership under his nose. It took 13 months. 13 months of pretending I wasn't watching, as Lucas gave keynote speeches filled with buzzwords he didn't understand. As my father introduced him at events as the man with vision, while I attended the same conferences as a guest speaker under my alternate company name, never once acknowledged. I could have revealed myself at any moment, but it wasn't time, not yet. Elijah and I had agreed the damage wasn't deep enough. We needed the company to teeter, not just sway. So I waited, let Lucas push another flawed rollout to the Department of Defense, watched as another logistics failure cost the company $14 million in unrecoverable penalties. heard through internal whispers that board members were beginning to question his decisions behind closed doors. It was working. But power wasn't the only thing I built during that year. I built a team, not just employees, disciples of purpose, people who believed in rebuilding broken systems, in doing real work for real impact. People who didn't care about my last name, only my leadership. Veterans who'd seen war zones crumble due to poor supply chains. Engineers who were tired of being told good enough was good enough. We created something the industry had never seen, software that adapted in real time, learning from terrain, threat levels, and human fatigue patterns. It didn't just move supplies. It predicted needs. It saved lives. And no one, not Lucas, not my father, not a single person at Callahan Systems had any idea we were doing it until a contract was awarded. A $300 million federal bid, fast-tracked under national priority status, awarded to LNC Systems with the Pentagon's full endorsement. It was the kind of deal that reshaped landscapes, the kind of deal Callahan Systems had built its name on for decades. Now it belonged to me. Lucas tried to fight it, of course. He went on record calling our company unproven, our tech overhyped. He accused the review board of favoritism, of backdoor lobbying, but nothing stuck, because we didn't bribe. We outperformed. The data didn't lie, neither did the lives our prototype had saved in 3 separate field trials. And still, I said nothing. Let the silence speak for me. Even when a journalist reached out asking for an interview with the mysterious CEO behind LNC Systems, I declined. I wasn't ready to be seen, not fully, not until I could control the narrative, the setting, and the consequences. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about precision. The deeper the wound, the more delicate the surgery. But there was one moment, one tiny crack in my resolve, where I almost slipped. A charity fundraiser in DC. A friend dragged me there, swearing it would be low-key. It wasn't. Lucas was on the guest list. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, his smile faltered, just for a second. He walked over, drink in hand, arrogance in full display. "Well, look who decided to dress up," he said, scanning my outfit like I didn't belong in the same air. I smiled politely. "Lucas." He leaned in slightly. "You know, Dad still wonders what you do. Some kind of IT support thing, right?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because across the room, a military official in full uniform caught my eye, smiled, and raised a glass toward me. Lucas turned, confused. "Who was that?" I shrugged. "Just a friend from work." He walked away 5 minutes later, clearly irritated. And I stood there, alone but composed, knowing what he didn't. That I was no longer behind him. I was already 10 steps ahead. The closer I got to reclaiming what was rightfully mine, the more I understood the power of patience. Not the passive kind, the active, razor-sharp kind. The kind that waits not because it's weak, but because it knows when to strike. Behind the scenes, my acquisition plan entered its final phase. I already owned 49% of Callahan Systems through a firm named Solon Strategic Holdings, a name so generic it blended into the financial noise. The last 2% I needed, just enough to trigger a controlling vote, was owned by a retired board member named Sylvia Chen. Sylvia was no fool. She knew exactly what she held. But she also knew what the company had become. She'd seen the corruption seep in over time, contracts awarded to friends, funds misused, R&D slashed to pad quarterly reports. And she knew about me, not because I told her, but because she had always been the only person in that company who looked me in the eye when I was a teenager, following Dad around the office. So when I requested a private meeting, she agreed. We met at a quiet bistro in Georgetown. No suits, no security, just 2 women who knew how empires rose and how they rotted. I always wondered when you'd come for it, she said, sipping her tea. I smiled. You're not surprised? I watched them erase you in real time, Naomi. Your brother doesn't even know how to use the system he designed. Your father built a legacy on your silence. I figured one day you'd learn how to weaponize it. I'm not here for revenge, I said softly. She chuckled. No, you're here for correction. I slid a folder across the table, my full plan for restructuring, ethical audits, innovation revamps, profit sharing for employees, everything I wished Callahan Systems had done before it turned into a graveyard of old ideas. Sylvia read every page, and when she looked up, she said, I'm in. The papers were signed 2 days later. Just like that, I controlled 51% of the company my family used to rule. Still, I kept it quiet. The timing had to be perfect. The gala would be the stage. It wasn't just a party, it was my father's public retirement announcement, a symbolic passing of the torch. Lucas would be given the ceremonial key, the same one my grandfather had given Dad decades ago. The press would be there, investors, military contractors, everyone who ever dismissed me. They invited me out of obligation, no doubt expecting me to decline. I RSVP'd yes, not as Naomi Callahan, as CEO of Solon Strategic Holdings. The night of the gala, I arrived precisely on time, escorted by Elijah, who wore his discomfort in formal wear like armour. He hated public events, but he stood beside me because he understood what this meant. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold accents and polished egos. Lucas stood under the spotlight, all charisma and teeth, while my father sat proudly at the centre table like a king about to crown his heir. They didn't see me at first, or if they did, they assumed I was someone's date, someone forgettable, perfect. The programme began. Toasts, applause, a video montage of Dad's career that conveniently skipped over every project I had ever touched. Then the moment came. Lucas took the stage, arms wide, soaking in the applause. Tonight, he began, I accept not just a company, but a vision, a legacy, and I promise to take Callahan Systems to heights even my father never dreamed of. Applause, flashbulbs, pride. My father stood next to him, holding the key, and just as he reached out to hand it over, the lawyer, mine, not theirs, walked onto the stage, a folder in hand. Before we proceed, he said calmly into the mic, there's a matter of ownership to clarify. The room fell quiet. Lucas frowned. Excuse me? The lawyer opened the folder. As of 3 days ago, Solon Strategic Holdings officially owns a majority stake in Callahan Systems. Effective immediately, control transfers to the majority stakeholder. My father blinked. Lucas laughed nervously. What the hell is this? And that's when I stepped forward. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a daughter walking toward the spotlight her family swore she didn't belong in, and for the first time in their lives, they had to watch me take it. There's a moment, just one, when power changes hands, and everyone in the room feels it before the words are even said. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, unmistakable, like air leaving the lungs of a room that thought it was safe. That moment hit just as I reached centre stage. My heels clicked softly across the hardwood floor, echoing louder than any applause had that night. Lucas stared at me like he was watching a glitch in reality, one he couldn't process. My father blinked, once, then again, as if trying to wake from a bad dream. I took the microphone, nodded to the lawyer, and turned to face the crowd. Good evening, I said calmly. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Naomi Callahan. A ripple of whispers moved through the room. And as of this week, I continued, I am the majority shareholder of Callahan Systems. Someone in the back gasped. Another dropped their glass. I didn't flinch. The company has been acquired by Solon Strategic Holdings, which I oversee. Effective immediately, a new executive structure will be implemented, and this, I glanced toward Lucas, this transition begins now. Lucas stepped forward, face flushed. This is a joke. You're not part of this company. You've never even... He stopped himself. The silence dared him to finish that sentence. Never even what? Never been allowed in the room? Never been given the chance? Instead, he turned to our father. Dad, do something. But my father said nothing. He looked at me, not with hatred, not even confusion, with resignation, because deep down he knew this wasn't betrayal, this was consequence. Still, Lucas tried again. You blindsided us. This is a hostile takeover. I turned to the crowd. Is it hostile? If it's legal? If every share was purchased, documented, signed by your own board? I let the weight of my words settle. You built an empire on ignoring me, I said softly, and I built a better one while you weren't looking. The room held its breath. Then someone clapped. One person. Then two. Then a wave. Not all, but enough. Enough to mark the shift. Lucas's jaw clenched. You don't know what it takes to run this company. I met his eyes. No, but I know what it takes to save it. And then I dropped the next bomb. As of this morning, Callahan Systems has entered a merger agreement with LNC Systems. The combined entity will operate under the name LNC Callahan Dynamics. I'll be serving as CEO. That broke the room. LNC, my company, the one they dismissed as a tech footnote. Now it was consuming the giant. My mother stood slowly, voice shaking. Naomi, sweetheart, can we talk privately? I turned toward her. Now you want to talk? Her mouth opened, closed, she sat down, and still my father said nothing. I handed the mic back to the lawyer. He finished reading the statement. Legalities, transfer clauses, role dissolutions. Lucas wasn't mentioned once. Neither was my father. It was deliberate. Let them feel what I felt for decades, what it's like to be erased while still in the room. Afterward, people approached me, shareholders, former skeptics, industry partners. Their smiles were polite, their words careful. But their eyes? Their eyes said what their mouths wouldn't. We underestimated you. Yes, you did. After the announcement, the ballroom didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a battlefield after the war was lost. The champagne still flowed, the waiters still passed hors d'oeuvres, but the mood had curdled into something colder. Eyes darted, conversations stopped when I walked by. The same people who had once ignored me now looked at me like I was holding a grenade they hadn't seen coming. And maybe I was. Lucas disappeared shortly after the announcement. 1 minute he was red-faced, clutching the mic stand like a drowning man. The next he was gone. I didn't bother looking for him. I knew exactly where he'd go, the bar, maybe the back exit, or more likely, to a board member dumb enough to think this coup could still be reversed. It couldn't. My father stayed seated for a long time. Everyone else eventually filtered out or adjusted. He didn't. He sat in silence, hands steepled under his chin, staring into the space where the company's crest hung above the stage. The same crest I used to trace with my fingers on the office walls when I was 8, imagining it might one day belong to me. Now it did. He finally stood, walked toward me slowly, and said in a voice so low I almost missed it, "You were always watching, weren't you?" I met his gaze. Yes. I thought you wanted nothing to do with this place. No, you thought I wasn't capable. He nodded once. No defense, no excuses. Then, do you hate me? I took a breath. I used to, but hate takes energy, and I'd rather spend mine building something that works. He nodded again, slower this time. Then he walked away. No hug, no apology, just acknowledgement. And somehow that was more honest than anything he'd ever given me. The days following the gala moved like a hurricane wrapped in silence. Internally, departments were in freefall. Lucas's cronies tried to hold on to their positions, but the documents I'd brought with me, audits, ethics violations, performance reviews, didn't lie. I made no public firings, no dramatic purges. I let the numbers speak. Within a week, 3 executives resigned. 2 others were quietly moved to consulting roles, which was our way of saying, "You're done here. I didn't celebrate. I worked." The transition to LNC Callahan Dynamics wasn't just rebranding, it was reconstruction. Every system was reviewed, every budget line reevaluated. My team stepped in with the efficiency of a special ops unit, installing updates and protocols while calming the nerves of middle managers who didn't know whether to fear or revere me. Then came the twist no one saw coming, a leaked memo. Someone from Lucas's old team had sent it to a reporter, an internal strategy deck proposing the offshore relocation of several factories to increase quarterly profit margins, despite devastating job losses in small-town America. The kind of memo that kills companies overnight. The press went wild. Callahan's systems was already fragile. This could have been the blow that shattered public trust. But the leak had a timestamp, 6 weeks old, before the merger, under Lucas's leadership. And now? Now it was mine to respond to. I didn't dodge. I went live. In a company-wide town hall streamed to all offices, I addressed the leak head-on. "I've read the memo," I said, "and let me be clear, it will never happen, not under my leadership. LNC Callahan Dynamics is not here to gut legacy for quarterly spikes, we're here to rebuild it with integrity." It was the first time employees heard my voice as CEO, and they listened, some skeptical, some cautious. But for the first time, they saw that this wasn't just a change in ownership, it was a change in philosophy. Later that night, a handwritten envelope was slipped under my office door. No name, just my initials on the front. Inside, one line, scrawled in my father's sharp mechanical handwriting. "You're doing better than I ever did." I stared at it for a long time, not because it made things right, but because it confirmed what I already knew. The daughter he had dismissed was now the leader he wished he'd been. There's something about quiet victories that feels more profound than thunderous applause. The headlines came and went. Daughter overtakes empire. Silent CEO speaks louder than legacy. But they didn't matter much to me. What mattered was the shift I felt walking through the halls of the headquarters. For the first time, people didn't avert their eyes when I passed. They nodded, they smiled, they asked questions, and listened to the answers. It was surreal, humbling, a little heartbreaking, because I realized they'd been waiting for someone like me all along. Someone who didn't pretend problems didn't exist. Someone who didn't mistake tradition for wisdom. I spent my mornings in operations, my afternoons in strategy, and my nights with legal. I reviewed contracts Lucas had signed, some with shockingly poor terms. He'd traded long-term value for short-term praise, stacking his resume with hollow wins that looked good on paper but bled the company dry. In one particularly brutal meeting, I found a proposal for a multi-million-dollar R&D initiative, filed under my father's name, but clearly conceived by a junior engineer who'd been buried in the org chart. His name was Brandon Wells, 27, MIT grad, barely making above intern-level pay. I scheduled a meeting. When Brandon walked in, he looked like he expected to be fired. Instead, I handed him the file and said, "Walk me through it, like I'm an investor." He stuttered at first, fumbled some numbers. Then, once he realized I was actually listening, he came alive. It was brilliant, technical, scalable, grounded in real-world needs. "I submitted this 8 months ago," he said, voice cautious. "Never heard back." I nodded. "You did now." I approved the project the next day and promoted him. The look on his face reminded me of me 15 years ago, pitching my first system to a room full of men who barely looked up from their phones. That moment cracked something open in me. Not rage, not regret, something closer to mourning. Mourning the years I spent trying to earn what I could have built on my own if I'd just stopped waiting. Later that night, I found myself standing outside the Callahan family estate. I hadn't been there in over 5 years. It looked smaller now. I rang the bell. My mother answered, her face pale with surprise. "Naomi," she whispered, like I was a ghost. "I won't stay long," I said. wanted to see the place. She let me in without a word. The house smelled the same, like lemon polish and restrained grief. The portrait of my father still hung in the foyer, arms crossed, eyes stern. The man who once told me I was too emotional to lead anything. My mother offered tea. I declined. She sat across from me, wringing her hands. "I don't know what to say," she said. "You don't have to." "But I want to." She looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "Your father always believed in control, in order. He thought if he made you feel small, you'd stay safe. That if he crushed your ambition early, you wouldn't get hurt by the world." I stared at her. "He succeeded, for a while." Tears welled in her eyes. "I should have done more. I raised a hand. "Mom, stop." She did. "I didn't come for apologies," I said. "I came because I needed to remember that this place doesn't own me anymore." She looked confused. I continued. "For so long, I thought I had to fix this family to be worthy. But I don't. I'm not here to heal old wounds. I'm here to close them." She nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. This time, it didn't sting, because I didn't need it. I stood, kissed her cheek, and walked out the door. Outside, the night was clear, the air sharp, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was walking home, to myself. The days after I visited the family estate felt lighter, like I'd shed something I hadn't realised I'd been carrying. Not grief, not anger, something deeper, permission. The constant craving for recognition that had once driven me now felt irrelevant. I no longer needed their approval. I had my own. Back at LNC Callahan Dynamics, the transformation was undeniable. Our reputation had shifted from a salvaged legacy to an innovation leader. What stunned most investors wasn't just how quickly we'd stabilised, it was how quickly we'd started winning. One morning, while reviewing a new AI proposal for predictive shipment routing, I received a message marked urgent from our federal liaison. Lucas had been arrested, fraud, embezzlement, tampering with defence-grade contracts. I stared at the screen, emotionless. Part of me had expected it. Part of me had hoped it wouldn't come to this. He'd crossed the line long before I reclaimed the company, but now there was hard evidence, documents signed under false pretenses, hidden accounts, shell companies routing funds through offshore networks. What he'd done wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. The headlines came fast. Lucas Callahan indicted in multi-million-dollar defence fraud scandal. From heir to defendant, the fall of the Callahan son. I said nothing publicly, but inside I held a quiet meeting with the board. "I want our name cleared," I said. "Not with press conferences, with audits, reports, transparency." And we did just that. Released a detailed third-party audit report to all stakeholders. Every questionable contract was traced, every dollar accounted for. We even set up an anonymous whistleblower hotline to ensure this would never happen again. Employees were stunned. They weren't used to leadership that chose accountability over image. But I didn't care about looking perfect. I cared about being clean. A week later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail, no return address. Inside, a simple note from Lucas, "You win." I crumpled it. Because this was never a game. This was my life. Weeks passed. The company flourished. Brandon's R&D project landed a contract with NATO Logistics. Our AI was featured in a global summit on ethical tech. Elijah was invited to lecture at MIT. Our stock value soared. And then, just when I thought I'd found a rhythm, another twist. My father asked to meet. At first, I refused, but curiosity got the better of me. So I agreed with one condition. It had to be in my office, on my terms. He arrived looking smaller than I remembered, not physically, spiritually. He sat across from me, silent for nearly a full minute before speaking. "I made a lot of mistakes," he began. I raised an eyebrow. "That's a start." "I wanted to protect the company. I thought Lucas was the better bet. He played the part, said the right things. You were..." unpredictable, emotional. I didn't think you could survive this world. I didn't, I said flatly. I rebuilt it. He nodded. I see that now. There was no apology, not really, just recognition. But somehow that was enough. He pulled out a folder. This was supposed to be yours, he said. But I gave it to Lucas years ago. I thought you wouldn't know what to do with it. I opened it. Patent designs, my early drafts, supply models I created at 16, all the things I thought he had thrown away. He hadn't. He'd locked them in a drawer, too afraid to believe in the daughter who made them. Why give them to me now? I asked. Because for the first time, he said, I think you might actually make them real. I closed the folder, stood, and offered my hand. He took it, not like a father to a daughter, but like a man acknowledging the force he once tried to suppress. When he left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, centered, as if something inside me had finally stopped fighting. I walked to the window, looking out over the city. For so long, I believed power meant proving people wrong. But real power? It's building a world where their opinions don't matter. It started with a single email flagged by my assistant, a forwarded message from a former accounting intern. The subject line was cryptic, Inheritance Inquiry. At first, I assumed it was spam, or another distant cousin trying to claw their way into my inbox now that the company had turned around. But something in the body caught my eye. It referenced a trust fund, one I'd never heard of, established in my name, 15 years ago, by my grandmother. I stared at the screen, my pulse rising. That couldn't be right. I'd been told there was no inheritance, no college fund, nothing left behind after she passed, except for a brooch and a few old photo albums. I remembered asking my father once if she had left anything for me. His answer had been flat. She loved you, but times were tough. He lied. I immediately called legal. Within 48 hours, I had the full report. It was real. A $2.5 million trust, structured to mature when I turned 25, with instructions to be used for education, entrepreneurship, or property. My name was on every document. And then, in handwriting, I recognized instantly my father's. There was a transfer order. The trust had been liquidated 10 years ago and rerouted through a family emergency fund. The money was gone, used to cover Lucas's failed biotech startup and part of the renovations on the family estate. I sat in my office, hands clenched around the report, heart numb. It wasn't just money, it was the confirmation I'd been waiting for, that I wasn't just overlooked, I was actively stolen from, that when my father said, "There was nothing left for you," what he meant was, "We chose not to give it to you." And that choice changed everything. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I went cold. By morning, I had a meeting set with our internal ethics council. The findings were clear. My father had acted unilaterally. It was technically legal under a vague clause in the trust, but deeply unethical. And since I was now CEO, I had the right to pursue an internal audit of all family-controlled assets linked to the company. Some advised me to let it go, that pursuing it would open wounds, stir the press, make me look vindictive. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in truth. We launched the audit, quietly, methodically, without warning. And what we found made the missing trust look like pocket change. Private bonuses issued to Lucas without board approval. Property purchased in Callahan Systems' name but never logged on company books. Payments to shell companies for consulting work that traced back to old college friends of his. Even my mother's name showed up on luxury expenses passed off as executive wellness. It was a rot. Not just from one person, but from a culture built on entitlement and impunity. And now that culture answered to me. I called a board meeting, emergency status. Every member attended, faces tight, some curious, others nervous. I didn't waste time. I laid out the findings, the violations, the years of manipulation and theft. And then I said, starting today, we are opening our books. Full transparency, full accountability, no exceptions, not for shareholders, not for executives, not for family. Someone asked what that meant. I said simply, "It means no one is untouchable anymore." One board member, an old friend of my father's, protested, "You'll burn bridges doing this." I met his gaze. Maybe, but I'd rather build new ones with steel than keep crossing ones made of rot. The vote passed, unanimous. Later that evening, I received a call from my father. I didn't answer. He texted instead, "We need to talk." But I had nothing left to say. He'd had his chance, his chances, and every one of them came at my expense. I stood by the window again, looking at the skyline that now bore our company's new name in gold and slate, LNC Callahan Dynamics. And I realised something. They didn't just underestimate me, they bet against me, and lost. The audit fallout wasn't just internal, it ignited a quiet storm across the industry. Competitors watched closely. Partners sent cautious emails, trying to gauge whether this cleansing was a sign of instability or a mark of integrity. It was both. And I didn't flinch. We released a summary of the findings in a controlled investor briefing, detailing what had been uncovered, the actions being taken, and the measures we were implementing to prevent recurrence. The response was sharper than expected. Investors didn't flee, they rallied. Because in a world saturated with corruption wrapped in corporate gloss, honesty was now a power move. But within the family, silence reigned. My mother stopped calling. My father, despite multiple unread messages, said nothing publicly. Lucas? He remained in legal limbo, his trial pending, his name already synonymous with greed and arrogance. Still, I wasn't prepared for what came next. An anonymous package arrived on my desk, wrapped in thick brown paper. Inside was a single USB drive and a typed note. You should know what he really planned. No signature, no return address. I ran a full cybersecurity check before opening the contents. What I found was staggering. Hundreds of emails between Lucas and a shadowy consultant group. The plan was simple. After my grandmother passed, they'd intended to challenge the trust, claim I was emotionally unstable, and redirect the funds under the guise of protecting family interests. There were drafts of fake psychological reports, conversations about manufacturing an incident, even a plan to leak a false story to the press to justify exclusion. It wasn't just theft, it was character assassination. It was erasure, written in ones and zeros. And it nearly worked. I sat for a long time staring at the screen, hands steady, pulse slow. Then I picked up the phone. "Prepare a full legal file," I told our chief counsel. "We're pressing charges." The news dropped like thunder. Callahan Harris seeks legal action over alleged trust fraud. Every outlet picked it up. Some sympathized, others questioned my motives. But I didn't care. This wasn't for the headlines. This was for the record. That weekend, I went to visit Brandon's newly opened R&D lab, one of the first initiatives I'd approved. The space buzzed with energy, young engineers, coders, designers, all working with a passion I hadn't seen in the company in years. Brandon greeted me, eyes alight with pride. "You started this," he said. I smiled. "You're the one building it." As I walked through the lab, something shifted inside me. All the rage, the grief, the weight, it didn't disappear, but it transformed into something cleaner, sharper, purpose. They tried to erase me, but now I was writing new blueprints. After the visit, I returned to headquarters to find an unexpected guest waiting in the lobby. My father. No security, no entourage, just him, older, smaller, deflated. "I won't come up unless you let me," he said, looking past the receptionist. I considered it, then nodded. We sat in the conference room, no lawyers, no audience, just the two of us, surrounded by glass and quiet. "I read the filings," he said, "about the trust, about Lucas." I waited. He didn't justify, didn't argue, just said, "You were right." Then more softly, "And I was cruel." There was no trembling in his voice, no theatrics. It was the truth, unvarnished. I didn't respond right away. Finally, I said, "I don't need an apology." He looked confused. Hurt, maybe. "I needed to survive," I continued. "And I did. That's enough." He nodded, slowly. "I hope one day you'll forgive me," he said. I stood. "I already have." His head jerked up. "But forgiveness," I added, "isn't an invitation back into my life. It's a release, for me." I walked him to the elevator. As the doors closed, he looked at me one last time. "I always knew you were the smart one," he said. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just watched the elevator descend, then turned back to my office, where my world, built with scars and steel, was still waiting. The months that followed were both quiet and loud in their own way. Quiet in the sense that the headlines faded, and for the first time, the company wasn't being defined by scandal, takeover, or betrayal. Loud in how the world responded to the rebirth of a name once marred by internal rot. LNC Callahan Dynamics had become a case study, the new gold standard. Tech magazines called us the Phoenix firm. Harvard Business Review requested a case analysis. MIT invited me to guest lecture. Investors began referring to our comeback as the Naomi effect. But beneath the accolades, I kept my focus steady. We had momentum now, and momentum is a fragile thing. You don't ride it, you steer it. So I spent each day aligning our operations with a vision larger than legacy. I wasn't interested in preserving the past. I was building the future. One morning, as I was reviewing a global sustainability initiative, Elijah, my closest advisor and COO, entered my office. "We got the final clearance," he said. I looked up. "For the launch?" He nodded. I leaned back in my chair, letting the news settle. It had been a year in the making. Walker AI Logistics, my original idea, the one my father had mocked as a hobby, the one I pitched anonymously to an incubator 15 years ago, it was now real, tested, validated, ready. Elijah handed me a press kit. "You want to announce it?" he asked. I smiled. "No," I said. "I want to show them." And we rented out the main auditorium at our headquarters, invited every employee across our global branches to tune in live. No flashy lights, no fog machines. Just a clean stage, a sharp keynote, and me standing at the center of a company that finally reflected the vision I had all those years ago. The screen behind me flickered on, and then it appeared, the first visual prototype of Walker AI, a fully integrated, predictive logistics system that could streamline global supply chains using real-time environmental, economic, and political data. Faster, smarter, more ethical. The crowd leaned in. "This," I said, "is not just a product, it's a promise." I walked them through the specs, the testing, the potential savings, not just in dollars, but in carbon emissions, operational waste, and human burnout. Then I paused and revealed the final slide, a side-by-side comparison of my original sketch from age 16 and the final product. The room gasped, because it wasn't just a victory, it was a vindication. "I pitched this once to someone who said it wasn't realistic," I said, eyes scanning the crowd. They were wrong. I ended the presentation not with numbers, but with something else, a message. To every person who's ever been told they're too quiet, too emotional, too much of a risk, don't wait for permission to prove them wrong. Build anyway. Thunderous applause followed, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out one last document from my folder and addressed the board, seated in the front row. "This is my final act as CEO," I said. They froze. Elijah blinked in confusion. "You're stepping down?" I smiled. "No, I'm evolving." The document outlined the transition of day-to-day operations to Elijah as incoming CEO, effective 6 months from now. I would step into a chairwoman role, guiding long-term strategy, acquisitions, and global expansion. It wasn't a resignation, it was a graduation. Because my time building in the shadows was over, it was time to lead from the light. After the event, I returned to my office to find another envelope on my desk. No handwriting, just embossed initials, NC. Inside was a letter from my grandmother. It had been held by our family lawyer to be delivered only when Naomi becomes the woman she was always meant to be. I read the first line and tears filled my eyes. My darling girl, if you're reading this, then you've already rewritten history. The rest I read in silence. Her words were filled with belief, with love, with the kind of legacy that isn't measured in dollars, but in faith passed between generations. When I finished, I looked out at the skyline once more, and this time I smiled. Because this wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the beginning of something far more powerful, a dynasty reimagined, built not on bloodline but on resilience. In the weeks following the launch and my transition announcement, a new rhythm took shape. I still arrived early, still stayed late, but the pressure had shifted. It was no longer about proving I belonged, it was about stewarding something larger than myself, something I had bled for, something I had rebuilt from ash. Elijah began stepping into his CEO duties with the steadiness I knew he had. Meetings, forecasts, daily ops, all his now. And he thrived, not because I handed him power, but because he earned it with the same fire that once drove me through boardroom shadows. I focused on the horizon, our international expansion, cross-industry partnerships, and long-term AI ethics frameworks. The kind of work no one sees but shapes everything that follows. But it was a conversation with Brandon, our R&D lead, that brought it all into focus. "You know what people keep asking me?" he said one morning as we walked through the prototype lab. "What's that?" I asked. "They ask if this company will ever be the same without you running it day to day." I smiled. "Tell them it's not supposed to be." He looked confused. "Legacy," I said, "isn't about building something that can't run without you. It's about building something that gets better because of you, and then survives without needing you." He nodded, understanding. That was the moment I knew I'd done enough. The rest would be carried forward by others, by believers, by builders, by people like me, only louder, bolder, and faster. 3 months later, I was invited to deliver the keynote at the Global Tech Ethics Summit in Geneva. It was the biggest stage of my life. Hundreds of leaders, engineers, economists, and policymakers filled the glass-domed hall. Screens streamed the talk live to 10 countries, cameras flashed, but I wasn't nervous, because this wasn't about me anymore, this was about the future. I stepped onto the stage and told the story, not of my rise, but of the system that tried to erase me. I spoke of silent daughters, overlooked thinkers, and the toxic traditions that confuse hierarchy with merit. Then I said something I hadn't planned. "My name is Naomi Callahan. I was the mistake they forgot to erase, the storm they didn't see coming, and the architect of the empire they tried to keep from me. But I'm not here to celebrate revenge. I'm here to redefine power." The room went still, because truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't need decoration. After the summit, my inbox exploded. Interview requests, collaborations, even a private note from the UN's Tech Commission asking for a roundtable discussion. But one message stood out. It was from my mother. She'd watched the keynote online. Her email was short. "I finally understand now, and I'm sorry I didn't sooner. Love, Mom." No requests, no justifications, just acknowledgement. And that meant more than she'd ever know. On the day Elijah officially stepped into the CEO role, we held a quiet ceremony. No press, no gala. Just the core leadership team in a glass-walled conference room watching as I handed over the leadership seal that had once belonged to my father. "It's yours now," I said, placing the plaque in Elijah's hands. He looked at me with a blend of gratitude and disbelief. "I'll make you proud." "You already have," I replied. And then, as everyone raised their glasses, I stepped back. Not in retreat, but in release. Because the empire didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the future. That night, I walked through the city alone. The streets pulsed with summer energy. Music from cafes, laughter in the air. Life unfolding with or without my permission. I reached the plaza where I once stood after being rejected from my father's firm. Same spot, same skyline. But I was different now, not a girl begging for a seat at the table, but a woman who had built the table and then invited everyone else in. A woman who had been underestimated, overlooked, and nearly erased. And still she rose, not because of vengeance, but because of vision, and finally she was free.